you that Melly told him that he was two friends?
He ain't come out and say, like, we got into an argument. And so, you know, if you know, when people could say something without saying it.
Melly walked into court for what seemed like a routine motion hearing, but things took a wild turn fast. The defense didn't just argue their case, they flipped the script so convincingly that even the judge had to take a step back. The prosecution, caught off guard, struggled to defend their claims after being called out for spreading false information. Whispers spread through the courtroom as people sensed the shift. Something wasn't adding up, and the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. What started as just another hearing had suddenly turned into a moment no one would forget. The courtroom was thrown into complete shock when the judge unexpectedly ordered the state to release the Apple iCloud search warrant linked to the defense lawyer's account. No one saw this coming, and it left the entire room stunned. People exchanged confused looks, trying to grasp the implications of what had just happened. The prosecution, clearly caught off guard by this sudden development, rushed to come up with a response. They hadn't anticipated the judge making such a move, and now they were scrambling to figure out how to handle the situation. On the other hand, the defense lawyer stayed calm and collected. They knew that this decision could be a game changer, a moment that might just tip the balance in their favor. The tension in the room grew thicker by the second. Everyone, whether they were part of the legal teams, the witnesses, or the observers, could feel the shift in the air. What had started as just another routine hearing was now turning into something much more significant. It was clear that the judge's ruling was not just a small procedural step, it had the potential to alter the entire course of the case. For the defense, this was the moment they had been waiting for. They had quietly believed that there was something in the iCloud search warrant that could work in their favor, something that could potentially expose a flaw or provide crucial evidence. They knew they had to stay calm and let—
This investigation is separate and apart from the defendant's current case. It conflicts with paragraph 11 that implies that this investigation—
the judge's decision play out because, if everything went according to plan, this could become the turning point in their argument. On the other side, the prosecution was now in damage control mode. They had prepared for the usual proceedings, but this unexpected order threw them completely off balance. They had been expecting the hearing to go according to a predictable script, but the judge's decision had upended all of their expectations. Now, they had to quickly adjust and figure out how to handle the release of this information, which could have serious consequences for their case. It was a moment of uncertainty for the prosecution, one that could shake their confidence and put them in a vulnerable position. The judge's decision to release the search warrant also raised a lot of questions about what might be inside it. If the document contained information that could cast doubt on the prosecution's case or raise new doubts about the evidence being used against the defendant, it could be devastating for the prosecution's argument. For the defense, this was their opportunity to uncover something that might have been overlooked, something that could turn the tide in their favor. As the courtroom waited for the next steps, the tension continued to rise. People were on edge, unsure of what was coming next. The defense lawyer was careful not to show too much excitement, but inside, they knew this was their moment. This ruling had opened the door for them to explore new angles, to dig deeper into the evidence, and to find any cracks in the prosecution's case. They knew that this could lead to a breakthrough, something that would give them the upper hand in the trial. For everyone else in the courtroom, the situation had shifted dramatically. What was supposed to be a standard legal procedure had now turned into a high-stakes moment that could determine the outcome of the case. The judge's ruling was a turning point, and no one knew exactly how it would play out. Would the defense find something crucial in the search warrant, or would the prosecution manage to recover and find a way to keep their case intact? As the courtroom grew quieter, the weight of the moment became even more apparent. People were holding their breath, waiting to see how the situation would evolve. The judge's order had thrown a wrench into the carefully laid plans of the prosecution, and now the defense had an opportunity to seize control. But the next move was crucial. Whatever came next could make all the difference in this case. It was clear that this wasn't just another routine hearing. The stakes had suddenly become much higher, and everyone in the room understood that the case was no longer just a matter of legal procedures. It had become a battle of strategy, preparation, and timing. Every move from here on out would count.
Well, a couple things. Since the state filed a motion for rehearing, there are misstatements in their motion that need to be corrected. Since we received this—
And as the tension lingered, the outcome of this unexpected twist remained uncertain, leaving everyone wondering how it would all unfold. The judge's decision had set the stage for a dramatic shift, and everyone in that courtroom was waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Would the defense lawyer manage to use this new information to their advantage, or would the prosecution find a way to recover and regain control? The courtroom was on edge, and it was clear that nothing would be the same from here on out. Melly's mother looked visibly upset, her emotions written all over her face, while his lawyer, Raven Liberty, remained deep in thought, preparing for the tough legal fight ahead. The restrictions on Melly's communication hadn't changed. He was still only allowed to speak in controlled, supervised settings. Every conversation was monitored, every word carefully noted. The weight of the case hung over him like a cloud, making even the smallest decisions feel critical. His family and legal team knew that one wrong move could have serious consequences. The pressure was growing, and with so much on the line, everyone felt the intensity of what was coming next. The courtroom was packed with tension, emotions running high as everyone watched closely. Then, for the first time in over a year, Melly spoke directly to the judge. The moment felt heavy. His voice broke through the silence, and every person in the room turned their full attention to him. Even those who had been whispering or shifting in their seats suddenly froze, hanging on to every word. The
Due process. The state is seeking the death penalty. It is very clear that one of his lawyers is under investigation. The one thing I can tell you is not going to happen is someone that has been in custody for 2,000.
The prosecution watched carefully, trying to read between the lines, while the defense remained still, knowing this moment could shift everything. No one dared to look away. Everyone was waiting to see what he would say next. As everyone sat in the courtroom waiting for the judge to begin the hearing, the defendant remained composed, calmly acknowledging the small group of supporters in the back with a simple nod. Despite the serious nature of the situation, he didn't seem anxious at all. He sat quietly, his demeanor calm, almost as if he wasn't facing the weight of the moment. But when the judge finally walked into the room, the entire atmosphere shifted. The air suddenly felt much thicker, heavy with anticipation. Everyone in the room, from the lawyers to the onlookers, turned their attention to the judge, knowing that this was the moment the real battle would begin. The focus of the day's hearing was clear. It was all about the Apple search warrant, and that issue was about to take center stage. The prosecution wasn't ready to let go of the matter just yet. They weren't backing down, and they had officially filed a motion asking the court to reconsider the decision regarding the search warrant. This meant that the judge would have to take another careful look at the entire situation. The defense had hoped the matter might be settled already, but the prosecution's motion had forced the judge to revisit the issue. The decision wasn't final, so the judge wasted no time in addressing the matter. He instructed that the search warrant, along with the affidavit, be formally submitted again for further review. The tension in the room grew even more palpable. This wasn't just another routine day in court. This was a critical turning point in the case. The judge's ruling on this matter could have significant consequences for both sides. The stakes were incredibly high, and it was clear that every move from here on out would be watched closely. Every piece of evidence would be examined carefully. Every motion, no matter how small, would be scrutinized, and every argument made would be weighed with the utmost seriousness. At this point, no detail was considered too insignificant. Every piece of information, whether it was a small text, a single document, or a piece of testimony, would be put under microscope. With so much riding on this, the outcome of today's hearing could change the course of the entire trial. No one in the room could afford to overlook anything, knowing that even a small decision could shift the balance in favor of one side or the other. As the hearing continued, both sides were on edge. The defense, knowing that the judge had ordered the submission of the search warrant and affidavit for further review, tried to stay focused on what was to come. This could be their chance to show why the warrant should be thrown out, or at least why its contents shouldn't be used in the case. The prosecution, on the other hand, was determined to make sure their position was still upheld.
Crazy way that Melly was communicating. He wasn't allowed to use the phone, but he was passing notes to people, and then this person's calling this person, and then that person.
They like to me,
They needed the evidence from the search warrant to stay in play, and they weren't going to give up without a fight. Everyone knew that the judge's ruling would be crucial. If the court decided in favor of the prosecution, the search warrant would remain valid, and the evidence obtained from it could continue to be used against the defendant. However, if the judge sided with the defense, that evidence could be thrown out, weakening the prosecution's case significantly. In this high-stakes environment, the courtroom became a place of intense focus. Every word spoken by the attorneys, every question asked by the judge, and every reaction from the defendant and their supporters mattered. The pressure was on, and it felt as though every moment was building up to something bigger. The outcome of this hearing had the potential to shape the future of the case, and everyone in that room was acutely aware of that fact. The defense, still calm on the surface, knew that this was a pivotal moment. They had prepared for the possibility of a motion to reconsider, and now that it was happening, they had to stay sharp. They needed to argue their case effectively, making sure that the judge understood why the search warrant should not stand. Meanwhile, the prosecution had their own work cut out for them. They needed to present a convincing argument that the warrant was valid and that any evidence obtained through it was crucial to their case. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that this wasn't just a legal matter, it was a test of strategy and endurance. The attorneys knew that every argument they made could either make or break their case. The judge, meanwhile, had the responsibility of making a decision that would ultimately decide the fate of this critical piece of evidence. The weight of that decision hung heavily in the room, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. As the proceedings continued, the room remained tense, with no one knowing what the next step would be. Would the judge rule in favor of the prosecution and allow the search warrant to stand, or would the defense manage to convince the court that the warrant was invalid? Every minute felt like a crucial moment, and the outcome was uncertain. One thing was clear. The stakes had never been higher, and everyone in the courtroom was acutely aware that this hearing could change everything. From here on out, every decision made could have a lasting impact, and no one was taking that lightly. The pressure was on, and the fate of the case seemed to rest on the judge's next move. The prosecution still hadn't made it clear whether they would follow the judge's order to release the search warrant. There was a strong chance they would try to delay or block its release altogether, using legal arguments to justify their stance. As the debate dragged on, the tension in the courtroom grew. Every person in the room could feel the weight of what was happening. The judge, unwilling to let the issue slide, kept pressing for answers. At one point, the judge asked a simple but important question. Shouldn't the defense at least have a copy of the search warrant, even if the affidavit wasn't handed over right away? The state didn't back down. They admitted the defense might get it at some point but insisted it wasn't necessary at this stage of the case. The defense, clearly frustrated, argued that withholding such a key document was unfair. The judge wasn't satisfied. He drew a clear comparison. If police officers searched someone's home, they would have to leave a copy of the warrant with the homeowner. So why should this case be any different? The prosecution fired back, saying the rule didn't apply here because the order was issued to Apple, not an individual. The judge wasn't fully convinced, and the tension in the room thickened. As the back and forth continued, the state's position became more obvious. They believed the defense had no urgent right to see the warrant. The longer the argument dragged on, the clearer it became that neither side was willing to budge. Everyone in the courtroom knew this wasn't just another legal dispute. It was a fight that could change the course of the entire case. This put the defendant in a tough spot. Should he stay with his current legal team and risk complications, or find new lawyers to avoid potential issues? The judge made it clear. The final decision was his alone. At the same time, the judge reminded everyone that his role wasn't to dictate legal strategy but to protect the defendant's rights. Unless the state presented a strong legal reason to step in, the issue of potential conflicts would remain between the defendant and his attorney. The judge was firm. Some motions could be put on hold, but the trial date would not change. The tension in the courtroom grew as the judge made sure everyone understood. The case was moving forward, no matter what. Delays wouldn't be allowed, and all outstanding matters had to be resolved before trial. There was no time for postponements, and the clock was ticking. The next few decisions wouldn't just affect legal strategy, they could change the entire course of the case. The defense acknowledged the court's position but didn't shy away from voicing concerns about certain legal motions. However, the judge remained firm. There would be no unnecessary delays. The court reviewed the schedule for handling pending motions, suggesting options like pretrial hearings in the coming months or addressing these issues during the trial itself. But waiting until the trial to settle them wouldn't be ideal, and the judge wanted everything handled in an orderly manner. With over 2,160 days already spent behind bars, the defendant couldn't afford more delays. The judge made it clear. The trial would move forward as scheduled. A fair trial was important, but that didn't mean dragging things out endlessly. Any outstanding motions would be resolved within the given time frame, and the process would not stall. The pressure in the courtroom was undeniable, with both sides knowing that every decision carried weight. To ensure their position was understood, the defense planned to submit a written response reaffirming the defendant's right to any information that could impact the trial. They weren't asking for an immediate ruling, just clarity and transparency. Their goal was simple: to prevent anything from being overlooked before the trial officially began. The judge listened but showed no signs of reconsidering. Time was running out, and every move mattered now more than ever. The defense argued that if the ongoing investigation was directly connected to the defendant's charges, they had a legal right to access that information. Under discovery rules and legal precedent, the prosecution couldn't just make claims without providing solid proof. If they were going to link the investigation to the case, they needed real evidence to back it up. Without that, their argument held no weight. As both sides presented their arguments, the tension in the courtroom grew. The prosecution pushed hard to have the defendant's lawyer removed, insisting it didn't matter if the defendant wanted to keep them. But the defense stood firm. They made it clear the prosecution couldn't just say a conflict existed without real proof. A move like this wasn't minor. If the state wanted to remove legal counsel, they had to prove why with actual facts, not just accusations. This led to a heated debate. Even if the defendant accepted any possible conflict, the prosecution still argued that the lawyer had to be removed. The defense strongly disagreed and officially notified both the court and the prosecution that the burden of proof was entirely on the state. If they truly believed the attorney needed to go, they had to present undeniable evidence. Words alone wouldn't cut it. Without proof, their argument had no ground to stand on. The judge listened carefully, knowing this decision could have a major impact on the case. The prosecution needed to provide solid proof to back up their claim, but the defense wasn't backing down. They argued that without all the details, they couldn't respond properly. They also pointed out that the defendant had already spoken with his lawyers about any potential conflicts, and his attorney confirmed he was fully aware of the case and the defendant's situation. The defense made it clear they weren't just going to accept the prosecution's claims without real evidence. The judge enforced strict formalities, instructing all legal representatives to refer to the defendant by his legal name rather than any nickname or stage name. At one point, someone slipped and used a nickname, but the judge immediately corrected it, making sure the courtroom maintained professionalism. At this point, the defendant hadn't yet made a final decision about his legal team. He stated that he needed more information before choosing, which only added to the uncertainty surrounding the case. Recognizing the complexity of the situation, the judge remained firm. He stressed that confidentiality in legal discussions was essential but reassured both sides that the matter would be handled properly and fairly. The courtroom remained tense as the legal battle continued. The judge made it clear he would speak with the defendant at the end of the hearing but only within legal limits. He reassured everyone that no private conversations between the defense and the client would be exposed. Instead, the defendant would get a chance to explain his own position. The courtroom buzzed as people realized he was still unsure about his legal team. Some wondered if it was the right time to bring up such uncertainty. As the hearing came to a close, the defense made one last push, urging the judge to reject the prosecution's motion. They argued there was no solid proof of a conflict of interest. With the case moving forward, big decisions still need to be made. Will the judge side with the defense, or will the prosecution get their way? The answer could change the entire trial.